There are moments in life when you realize that love, no matter how pure, is not always enough. I learned this truth at 55 years old, standing in a kitchen that wasn't mine, cooking meals for people who couldn't even look me in the eye. My name is Teresa, and this is the story of how I died in silence, and was reborn in it too. When my husband passed away 3 years ago, the world became unbearably quiet. We had lived our entire lives in the countryside, in a small house with a garden where I grew tomatoes, basil, and roses. Every morning, I would wake up to the sound of birds and the smell of fresh earth. My hands were always dirty from the soil, but my heart was full. That house held 40 years of memories. Our wedding photos on the wall, the chair where he used to read the newspaper, the kitchen table where we shared every meal, every worry, every dream. But after he died, the silence in that house became too heavy. It pressed down on my chest at night. The empty chair at the table felt like an accusation. I tried to keep going. I really did. I planted more flowers, baked more bread, visited neighbors who pitied me with their kind eyes and sad smiles. But grief is a strange companion. It doesn't leave when you want it to. It settles into your bones, makes you feel older than you are, makes every sunrise feel like a burden instead of a gift. That's when my son called. Daniel, my only child, the boy I raised with every ounce of strength I had. I had given him everything, not because I had much, but because he was my everything. When his father and I struggled to pay for his education, I took extra work cleaning houses in town. When he wanted to study in the city, I sold my mother's jewelry to help him. When he got married, I gave him half of our savings so he could start his new life without worry. "Mom," he said over the phone, his voice warm and full of concern, "you shouldn't be alone out there. Come live with us. We have space. Your family." Family. That word wrapped around my heart like a promise. I cried that night, not from sadness, but from relief. I wouldn't be alone anymore. I would be with my son, my blood, the person I loved most in this world. I would help with the house, play with any grandchildren that might come, and finally feel useful again, finally feel loved again. So I left. I sold the little house in the countryside, the one my husband built with his own hands, the one where I buried my sorrow in the garden soil. I packed my life into 3 suitcases and a few boxes. I said goodbye to neighbors who hugged me and told me I was brave. I looked back one last time at the roses climbing the fence, and I whispered a prayer. Let this be the right choice. The city felt like another planet. Too much noise. Too many people rushing past without seeing each other. The apartment building where Daniel lived was tall and gray, with narrow hallways that smelled of cleaning products and other people's cooking. His apartment was on the 6th floor, modern, with shiny floors and furniture that looked expensive but uncomfortable. Everything was white and cold, like a hospital. When I arrived, Daniel hugged me, but it was brief, distracted. His wife, Mariana, stood behind him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was young, maybe 30, with perfect hair and manicured nails. She looked at me the way you look at a stain on your shirt, polite, annoyed, already planning how to deal with it. "Welcome, Teresa," she said. Not mom, not mother-in-law, just Teresa, as if I were a distant relative dropping by for a weekend visit. They showed me to my room. It was small, barely bigger than a closet, with a single bed, a small dresser, and a window that faced a brick wall. No garden, no view, just gray concrete and the muffled sounds of the city. I unpacked my things slowly, trying not to cry, telling myself this was temporary, that I would adjust, that home is where your family is. That first night, I cooked dinner. It's what I know how to do. It's how I show love. I made my son's favorite, chicken stew with potatoes and carrots, the recipe his grandmother taught me when I was a young bride. I set the table carefully, folded the napkins, even found a candle to light. I wanted it to feel special. I wanted them to see that I was grateful, that I would be useful, that I wouldn't be a burden. Daniel smiled when he tasted it. "Just like I remember, Mom." But Mariana barely touched her plate. She pushed the food around with her fork, then looked at Daniel and said, "It's too salty." I felt my face grow hot. "I'm sorry. I can make something else." "It's fine," she said, standing up. "I'm not that hungry anyway." She left the table, her heels clicking against the floor like little hammers. Daniel didn't say anything. He just kept eating, eyes on his phone. That was the first silence. But it wouldn't be the last. In the beginning, I tried to be helpful. I cleaned the apartment while they were at work, swept, mopped, organized. I folded their laundry, watered the plants, even ironed Daniel's shirts the way he liked them. I thought maybe if I made myself useful, I would earn my place here. Maybe Mariana would see that I wasn't a burden. Maybe my son would look at me with pride again. But nothing I did was ever enough. "Teresa, you used the wrong detergent on my clothes," Mariana would say, holding up a blouse as if it were evidence in a trial. "This is delicate fabric. Now it's ruined. Teresa, don't move my things. I had everything organized my way. Teresa, the bathroom isn't clean enough. I can still see water spots on the mirror." Every day, a new complaint. Every evening, a new sigh of disappointment. And Daniel? He said nothing. He would come home from work, kiss his wife, and disappear into their bedroom. If I tried to talk to him about my day, about how I was feeling, about anything, he would smile tiredly and say, "Not now, Mom. I've had a long day." I started to feel invisible, like a shadow that lived in their house but didn't really exist. I would sit in my small room at night, listening to them laugh together in the living room, and wonder when I had become so easy to forget. One Sunday morning, I woke up early and made breakfast. Fresh bread, scrambled eggs, coffee, orange juice. I set the table with care, hoping maybe we could all sit together, maybe talk, maybe feel like a family. Mariana came out first, still in her silk robe, hair perfect even first thing in the morning. She looked at the table, then at me. "We're going out for brunch," she said flatly. "You shouldn't have bothered." My heart sank. "Oh, I didn't know. Daniel didn't tell me." "Well, now you know." She walked past me to the bedroom. "Daniel, let's go." I stood there in the kitchen, surrounded by the breakfast nobody wanted, and felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart, not yet, but something close, something that had been holding me together. They left without saying goodbye. The door closed, and the apartment fell into that terrible silence again. I looked at the food I had prepared with so much hope, and I couldn't even eat it. I just sat down at the table and stared at the wall. That's when I realized I had given up everything to be here. My home, my garden, my memories, my peace. And for what? To be treated like a servant in my own son's house? To be invisible in the place I was supposed to belong? But I told myself to be patient, to be understanding. Mariana was young. Maybe she wasn't used to living with family. Maybe she needed time. And Daniel, he was busy with work, stressed, trying to build his career. Of course he didn't have time to notice how I was feeling. Of course. I told myself these things every night. I whispered them like prayers. Because the alternative, the truth I wasn't ready to face, was too painful to accept. If you like emotional stories that touch the heart, please subscribe to our channel. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything. Also, comment below and tell us what city you're watching from. We'd love to know who's listening to Teresa's story. The weeks passed slowly. Each day felt longer than the last. I became a ghost in that apartment. A presence felt but never acknowledged. I cooked. I cleaned. I stayed quiet. And I waited for things to get better. But they didn't. They only got worse. It started with the small things. The things you tell yourself don't matter. The things you swallow down because confrontation feels worse than silence. Mariana stopped saying good morning. She would walk past me in the hallway as if I were furniture. If I was sitting in the living room, she would turn on the television without asking what I was watching. If I was cooking, she would come into the kitchen, open the refrigerator, sigh loudly, and leave, as if my very presence there was an inconvenience she had to endure. At first, I made excuses for her. Maybe she's tired. Maybe she's stressed about work. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. After all, I'm living in her home. I should be grateful. I should be quiet. I should be small. So I became smaller. I stopped sitting in the living room during the day. I stayed in my little room, keeping the door mostly closed so I wouldn't bother anyone. I stopped cooking elaborate meals, just simple things that wouldn't make too much mess or require too many dishes. I learned to move through the apartment like a whisper. Soft steps, quiet breathing, invisible. But even that wasn't enough. One evening, I was washing dishes after dinner. Daniel and Mariana were in the living room watching a movie. I heard her voice, clear and sharp, cutting through the sound of the television. I don't understand why she has to be here all the time. My hands froze in the soapy water. I held my breath, straining to hear Daniel's response. She's my mother, Mari. Where else would she go? I don't know. Back to where she came from? A retirement home? Somewhere? Her voice was casual, as if she were discussing what to have for lunch. It's just awkward. I feel like I can't relax in my own house. There was a pause. A long, terrible pause where I waited for my son to defend me, to say something, anything, that would prove I still mattered to him. I know it's been an adjustment, Daniel finally said. His voice was low, apologetic. Not to me, to her. But she gave up everything to be here. She sold her house. She has nowhere else. Well, whose fault is that? Mariana shot back. I didn't ask her to come. You invited her without even discussing it with me properly. She's family. She's your family. I turned off the water. Very slowly, very carefully. I dried my hands and walked back to my room. I closed the door quietly. So quietly they wouldn't even know I had heard. And then I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall. She's your family, not ours, not theirs, just his. And even he couldn't really defend me. Even he seemed apologetic for my existence. That night, I didn't cry. I think I was too shocked to cry. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying those words over and over. I don't understand why she has to be here all the time. I feel like I can't relax in my own house. This was supposed to be my home too. Daniel had said so. He had promised me I would be welcome, that I would be safe, that I would be loved. But somewhere between that phone call and now, the promise had evaporated, and I was left here, in this cold apartment, more alone than I had ever been in the countryside. At least there, I had my garden. At least there, the silence was mine. The next morning, Mariana didn't even pretend to be civil anymore. She walked into the kitchen where I was making coffee and said, "We need to talk about groceries." I turned to face her, trying to smile. "Of course. Do you need me to pick something up?" "No." She crossed her arms. "I need you to stop eating so much. Our grocery bill has doubled since you moved in." The words hit me like a slap. I felt my face grow hot with shame. I don't eat much. Teresa, I'm not blind. You're here all day. You're constantly in the kitchen. Snacking, cooking, whatever. It adds up. I cook for all of us, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was helping. Well, you're not. You're costing us money. She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. From now on, just eat what we eat. Don't make extra portions for yourself. And don't touch the groceries I buy. Those are for Daniel and me. She left. Just like that. As if she hadn't just told me I wasn't allowed to eat freely in the house I had helped pay for. As if she hadn't just reduced me to a burden, a cost, an expense to be managed. I stood there alone in the kitchen and felt something inside me begin to crumble. Not all at once. Not yet. But piece by piece, like a wall slowly coming down. Later that day, I went into the bathroom to wash my face. On the counter, I saw a new bottle of expensive hand soap, the kind Mariana bought from fancy stores downtown. There was a small label stuck to it, written in her handwriting, "Do not use, M&D only." I stared at that label for a long time. It was such a small thing, so petty, so cruel. She had labeled her soap so I wouldn't touch it, as if I were diseased, as if I were dirty. I backed out of the bathroom without washing my face. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on the bed. And finally, after days of holding it in, I cried. Not loud, desperate sobs, just silent tears that rolled down my cheeks and wouldn't stop. I had given this boy everything. I had sacrificed my comfort, my savings, my dreams, so he could have a better life. I had worked myself to exhaustion so he could go to university, so he could have opportunities I never had. And this was how he repaid me? By watching his wife humiliate me day after day and saying nothing? The worst part wasn't Mariana's cruelty. It was Daniel's silence. That hurt more than anything. Because her, I could understand. She was young, selfish, used to getting her way. She didn't love me. She had no reason to care. But Daniel, he was my son, my blood. The child I had carried, raised, loved with every fiber of my being. And he chose her comfort over my dignity. Every single time. Days turned into weeks, and the humiliations became routine. Mariana would criticize everything I did, how I folded towels, how I arranged the dishes, how I walked too loudly, how I breathed too heavily. Nothing I did was right. And Daniel? He started avoiding me altogether. He would come home, say a quick hello, and disappear into his room. On weekends, they would go out without inviting me. They would order food and not ask if I wanted anything. They would talk and laugh as if I weren't there. I became a ghost, present but unseen, alive but unlived. One afternoon, Mariana's mother came to visit. I was in the kitchen preparing tea when I heard them in the living room. "So, how's it going with the mother-in-law?" her mother asked, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Mariana laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Oh my God, don't even get me started. She's here all the time, just hovering. It's suffocating. Why don't you ask Daniel to do something about it?" "I have. But you know how men are. He feels guilty, like it's his responsibility." "Well, it's not your responsibility, sweetheart. You have your own life to live." "Exactly. Thank you. Finally, someone who understands." They laughed together. I stood there, frozen, holding a teapot that suddenly felt too heavy in my hands. They were talking about me like I was a pest, an infestation, something to be removed. I set the tea down quietly and walked back to my room. I didn't bring it out to them. Let them get their own tea. That night, I looked at myself in the small mirror above my dresser. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Her eyes were dull. Her face was drawn. Her shoulders were slumped in permanent defeat. When had I become this person? When had I stopped fighting? When had I accepted that this was all I deserved? I thought about my husband. What would he say if he could see me now? Would he be disappointed? Would he tell me to leave? Or would he understand that sometimes love makes us weak? That sometimes we endure things we shouldn't because we hope, desperately, foolishly, that things will get better. But things weren't getting better. They were getting worse. And deep down, in a place I didn't want to look, I knew the truth. I had to do something. I couldn't live like this forever. I couldn't keep shrinking and apologizing and accepting cruelty as if it were kindness. But what could I do? Where could I go? I had nothing. No money. No home. No options. Or so I thought. The morning it truly shattered. The morning I stopped believing I could endure, began like any other. Quiet. Cold. Lonely. I had woken up at 6, as I always did. My body still following the rhythms of country life even though the city had long since swallowed me whole. I got dressed slowly, my joints aching in ways they never had before. Stress, I think. Or maybe just age finally catching up with all the pretending I'd been doing. I walked to the kitchen, careful to make no noise. The apartment was dark and still. I started preparing breakfast. Just toast and coffee. Nothing elaborate. Mariana had made it clear I was eating too much. Costing too much, existing too much. So now I ate like a bird, picking at scraps, trying to take up as little space as possible. But that morning, something was different. I felt dizzy, a strange, floaty sensation in my head, like the floor wasn't quite solid beneath my feet. I gripped the counter, closing my eyes, waiting for it to pass. It didn't. My vision blurred. My knees buckled slightly. I thought about calling out for help, but who would come? Daniel, who barely spoke to me anymore. Mariana, who looked at me like I was a stain on her perfect life. I made it back to my room somehow, each step an effort. I lay down on the bed, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I'll just rest for a moment, I told myself. Just a moment. Then I'll get up and make breakfast. I'll be fine. I closed my eyes. The dizziness swirled around me like water, pulling me under. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes again, light was streaming through the small window. Bright, harsh morning light. I looked at the clock on the dresser. 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock. I had slept through the morning. I never slept this late. Never. My heart lurched with panic. Breakfast. I hadn't made breakfast. Mariana would be furious. I tried to sit up, but my head spun violently. I fell back against the pillow, breathing hard. Just a few more minutes, I thought. Just until the dizziness passes. But I didn't get a few more minutes. The door to my room burst open with such force it slammed against the wall. I jerked upright, my heart hammering, and there she was. Mariana, standing in the doorway like an avenging angel, her face twisted with rage. "What the hell are you doing?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. I opened my mouth to explain, but she didn't give me a chance. "It's 9 o'clock, Teresa! 9! And you're still in bed like some kind of princess." She strode into the room, her arms crossed over her chest. "I've been waiting for breakfast. Daniel left for work without eating because you were too lazy to get up and do your job." "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I wasn't feeling well. I got dizzy and—" "I don't want to hear your excuses," she snapped. "You live here for free. The least you can do is pull your weight. But no, you'd rather lie around while the rest of us work." I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of her. Not anymore. "I'll make lunch," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll make something nice for when Daniel comes home." "Lunch?" She laughed. A cold, ugly sound. "You think I'm going to trust you to make lunch after this? Just get up and make yourself useful. Clean something. Do laundry. I don't care. Just stop lying around like you're on vacation." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Her next words were delivered with such casual cruelty that they didn't even sound like an insult, just a statement of fact. "Honestly, I don't know what Daniel sees in you. You don't contribute anything. You just take up space and eat our food. If it were up to me, you'd be gone already." The door slammed shut behind her. I sat there on the edge of the bed, my whole body trembling. Not from the dizziness anymore. From rage. From humiliation. From the realization that I had been screamed at, berated, and insulted in my own son's house. And he wasn't even here to hear it. And even if he had been, would he have said anything? Would he have defended me? I knew the answer. And it broke something inside me that I didn't think could break anymore. I got up slowly, steadying myself against the wall. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to move. I walked to the bathroom, careful to avoid the labeled soap, the one I wasn't allowed to touch, and splashed cold water on my face. The woman in the mirror looked like a stranger. Hollow eyes, gray skin, beaten. When had I become this person? I went to the kitchen and started cleaning, even though it was already clean. I scrubbed counters that didn't need scrubbing. I swept floors that didn't need sweeping. I needed to move, to do something, anything, to stop the thoughts from spiraling in my head. But I couldn't stop them. She had called me lazy, useless, a burden. And the worst part? A small, terrible part of me wondered if she was right. Maybe I was too old, too slow, too much. Maybe I didn't belong here. Maybe I didn't belong anywhere. "No," a voice inside me whispered. A quiet voice, but firm. "No, you are not useless. You are not a burden. You are a woman who gave everything for her son. You are a woman who worked herself to exhaustion so he could have a better life. You are a woman who deserves respect." But respect wasn't something I could demand. Not here. Not from them. Later that afternoon, I was folding laundry in the small utility room when I heard Mariana on the phone. Her voice drifted through the apartment, loud and careless. "Yeah, she's still here," she was saying to whoever was on the other end. Probably one of her friends. "I keep dropping hints, but Daniel won't do anything about it. He's too soft." A pause. Then laughter. "I know, right? I mean, I get that she's his mother, but there's a limit. I didn't sign up to be a caretaker for some old woman who can't even wake up on time. Old woman." I stood there, holding one of Daniel's shirts, and felt something inside me go very still. Very cold. I wasn't old. I was 55. I had decades left to live. But to her, I was already expired, already useless, already disposable. That evening, when Daniel came home, I waited for the right moment. He was sitting at the dining table, scrolling through his phone while Mariana cooked dinner. Something she rarely did, but apparently I couldn't be trusted with that task anymore. "Daniel," I said softly, standing in the doorway, "can I talk to you?" He looked up, his expression distracted. "Yeah, Mom. What's up?" I hesitated. How do you tell your child that his wife is destroying you? How do you ask for help without sounding like you're complaining? How do you make him see what he's been refusing to look at? I wanted to say I'm sorry about this morning. I wasn't feeling well and— It's fine, Mom, he said, cutting me off with a wave of his hand. His eyes were already drifting back to his phone. Don't worry about it. But Mariana was upset, and I don't want to cause problems between you two. If there's something I can do differently— Mom! His voice was firmer now, edged with irritation. It's fine. Really. Can we not do this right now? I've had a long day. I stood there, my words dying in my throat. He wasn't going to listen. He wasn't going to help. He had already decided that my pain was an inconvenience, something to be brushed aside so he could get back to his life. Okay, I whispered. I'm sorry. I turned and walked back to my room before he could see the tears in my eyes. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. The apartment was quiet, except for the muffled sounds of Daniel and Mariana talking and laughing in their bedroom. I could hear the television, the low murmur of their voices, the intimacy of two people who belonged together, and I realized something that hurt more than all the insults, all the coldness, all the cruelty combined. I was completely alone. I had given up everything to be with my son, and now I was more alone than I had ever been in my life, at least in the countryside. I had my memories. I had my garden. I had the dignity of my own space, my own choices, my own life. Here, I had nothing. I was nothing. Or was I? That small voice whispered again, stronger this time. You are not nothing. You are just trapped. But traps can be escaped. I thought about the house I had sold, the money from that sale. Where had it gone? I had given half to Daniel for his down payment on this apartment. But the other half, I had put it in a savings account. An account in my name only. An account I hadn't touched because I thought I wouldn't need it, because I thought I would be taken care of here. How much was left? I couldn't remember, but it was something. It had to be something. And if it was something, then maybe, just maybe, I had options after all. For the first time in months, I felt a tiny flicker of something I had almost forgotten. Not quite hope, not yet, but possibility. The next morning, while Daniel and Mariana were both at work, I went to the bank. The bank was a 15-minute walk from the apartment. 15 minutes that felt like crossing into another world. With each step, I felt the weight of the apartment lifting off my shoulders. No one watching me. No one judging me. No one telling me I was too slow, too much, too worthless. Just me and the city streets, anonymous and free. Inside the bank, everything smelled like air conditioning and new carpet. I waited in line behind a young couple discussing a mortgage, their faces bright with hope for their future together. I remembered being that young once. I remembered believing that love and family were enough to protect you from the world. How wrong I had been. Next, please. I stepped up to the counter, my hands trembling slightly as I pulled out my identification. The teller was a woman about my age, with kind eyes and reading glasses perched on her nose. "Good morning," she said warmly. "How can I help you today?" "I'd like to check the balance on my savings account," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I slid my identification and account number across the counter, numbers I had memorized years ago but hadn't thought about in months. She typed something into her computer, her fingers quick and efficient. Then she looked up at me, her expression neutral but curious. "Your current balance is $43,218. I blinked. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" $43,218. She turned the screen slightly so I could see it. "You haven't made any withdrawals or deposits in quite some time. The interest has been accumulating." $43,000. I had forgotten. How could I have forgotten? When I sold the house, after giving Daniel half for his down payment, I had deposited the rest here. I had meant to use it for emergencies, for small comforts, for my future. But then life had happened. Grief had happened. And I had simply forgotten. Forgotten that I had power. Forgotten that I had choices. Forgotten that I was more than just a burden living in someone else's home. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I realized I was crying. Silent tears running down my cheeks right there at the bank counter. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were something else. Relief, maybe? Or awakening? "Yes," I said, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. Yes, I'm fine. I'm better than fine. I walked out of that bank feeling like a different person. The sun seemed brighter. The air seemed clearer. People passed by on the sidewalk, and I realized I was smiling, actually smiling, for the first time in months. $43,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough to rent a small apartment. Enough to live on while I figured out my next steps. Enough to prove that I didn't need them. I had never needed them. But as I walked back to the apartment, my smile faded. Because having options and using them were two different things. Could I really leave? Could I really walk away from my son? My only child? Even after everything? A part of me still hoped. Still believed that maybe if I tried harder, if I was better, if I could just make them see how much I loved them, things would change. That voice, the voice of a mother who had given everything, whispered that leaving would be abandonment. That real love meant staying. That real love meant enduring. But another voice, quieter but growing stronger, whispered something else. Real love should never feel like this. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice the woman sitting on the bench outside the apartment building until she called out to me. "Excuse me, dear. Do you have a moment?" I looked up. She was elderly, truly elderly, maybe 75 or 80, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that seemed to see right through you. She wore a simple floral dress and held a cane across her lap. "I'm sorry?" I said, confused. "I've seen you," she said, gesturing to the bench beside her. "Coming and going. You live in this building, don't you? 6th floor?" I nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. "Yes, with my son." "Ah," she smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I'm Mrs. Hernandez. I live on the 4th floor. I've been watching you, dear. Not in a creepy way," she added quickly, seeing my expression. I recognized the look, the walk, the way you carry yourself like you're trying not to take up too much space. I felt my throat tighten. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Her voice was gentle but firm. "Sit with me, just for a minute." I don't know why I obeyed. Maybe because it had been so long since anyone had spoken to me with kindness. Maybe because I was so tired of standing. But I sat down beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "I had a daughter-in-law once," Mrs. Hernandez said, staring out at the street. "Beautiful girl, smart, successful, everything a mother-in-law could want. Except she didn't want a mother-in-law. She wanted my son to herself, and I was just in the way." I looked at her sharply. "How did you know?" "Because I've been there, dear. I lived with them for 2 years. 2 years of slowly disappearing, of becoming smaller and smaller until I barely existed. My son loved me, I think, but he loved her more. And when you have to choose between peace in your marriage and defending your mother, most men choose peace." The truth of her words hit me like a physical blow. That was exactly what Daniel had been doing, choosing peace, choosing his wife's comfort over my dignity. And I had been making it easy for him by never forcing the choice, by accepting the cruelty in silence, by hoping it would somehow get better on its own. "What did you do?" I asked quietly. "I left." She said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I found a small apartment, got a part-time job at a library, and started living again. Really living. Not just existing in someone else's space, hoping they'd notice I was still human." "But didn't you feel guilty?" "Every single day," she admitted. "For months, I woke up feeling like I had abandoned my son, like I had failed as a mother. But then something changed. He started calling me. Not out of obligation, but because he wanted to. He started visiting. And you know what? Our relationship got better. Because I wasn't there to resent. I wasn't there to be the source of arguments. I was just his mother again. Not a burden, not a problem to solve. Just his mother." I felt tears welling up again. "I don't know if I can do that." "You can," she said, patting my hand with her weathered fingers. "You're stronger than you think. I can see it in you. You're just buried under all that hope and all that love. But one day, you'll realize that the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for him, is to let go." She stood up slowly, leaning on her cane. "Think about it, dear. And if you ever need to talk, I'm in apartment 402. I make excellent tea, and I'm a very good listener." She walked away, leaving me sitting alone on that bench with her words echoing in my mind. That night at dinner, if you could call it that, Mariana barely acknowledged my presence. She and Daniel talked about their day, their plans for the weekend, a vacation they were considering. They spoke around me, over me, as if I were a piece of furniture. I ate my small portion in silence, my mind far away. I kept thinking about Mrs. Hernandez, about her words, about the way she had described living again, not just existing. When was the last time I had lived? Really lived? After dinner, I washed the dishes alone in the kitchen. Daniel and Mariana had retreated to the living room, their laughter drifting through the apartment like a reminder of everything I wasn't part of. I stood at the sink, my hands in the warm, soapy water, and I made a decision, not to leave, not yet, but to stop hoping, to stop waiting for things to change, to stop shrinking. If I was going to stay, I would stay with dignity. And if I couldn't have dignity here, then I would find it somewhere else. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, but this time, I didn't rush to make breakfast. I got dressed carefully, putting on one of my nicer outfits, a simple blue dress I hadn't worn in months. I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to remember who I used to be before this apartment, before the humiliation, before I had learned to make myself invisible. I was still there, buried, but still there. I made myself breakfast, just for me, toast with butter and jam, fresh coffee. I sat at the kitchen table and ate slowly, savoring each bite. When Mariana came out of her bedroom, her hair still messy from sleep, she stopped short at the sight of me. "Where's breakfast?" she asked, her tone sharp. "I made myself something," I said calmly, meeting her eyes. "If you'd like breakfast, the bread is in the pantry." Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "I said the bread is in the pantry," I repeated, my voice steady. "I'm not making breakfast this morning." "Why not?" "Because I didn't feel like it." The silence that followed was electric. Mariana stared at me as if I had just spoken a foreign language, as if the furniture had suddenly learned to talk back. "Teresa," she said slowly, her voice dangerously quiet, "let me remind you that you live here because we allow you to, because Daniel is too kind to throw you out. The least you can do is—" "The least I can do," I interrupted, and my own voice surprised me with its firmness, "is treat myself with the respect that no one else in this house seems capable of giving me." I stood up, picked up my plate, and walked to the sink. Behind me, I could feel Mariana's shock, her rage building like a storm. "You ungrateful!" "I'm going out," I said, cutting her off. "I'll be back later." And I walked out of that apartment without looking back. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking. But for the first time in months, I felt alive. I didn't have a plan. I just walked, block after block, letting my feet carry me wherever they wanted to go. I found myself in a small park I'd never noticed before, with benches and flowers and old men playing chess at stone tables. I sat on a bench and breathed, just breathed. A woman about my age sat down beside me. She had a kind face and was feeding breadcrumbs to pigeons. "Beautiful morning," she said. "Yes," I agreed. "It is." And for the first time in so long, I meant it. I stayed in that park for 3 hours. 3 hours of just sitting, watching the world move around me, remembering what it felt like to exist without apology. The woman feeding pigeons eventually left, waving goodbye with a warm smile. Joggers passed by. Children played on the swings. Life continued, indifferent to my small rebellion, and somehow that was comforting. When I finally returned to the apartment, it was past noon. I expected anger. I expected confrontation. But what I found was something worse: indifference. Mariana was on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look up when I came in. Daniel wasn't home, probably at work, living his life as if nothing had changed, because for him, nothing had. I went to my room and closed the door. For the first time, I didn't feel like a prisoner in that small space. I felt like someone who had chosen to be there, even if only temporarily. It was a subtle shift, but it mattered. Over the next few days, I stopped performing the role they had assigned me. I didn't wake up at dawn to prepare breakfast. I didn't clean constantly. I didn't make myself invisible. I existed. I moved through the apartment as if I had every right to be there. Because I did. Mariana noticed immediately. The tension in the apartment thickened like humidity before a storm. She would slam cabinet doors, sigh dramatically when she saw me sitting in the living room, make pointed comments about people who didn't pull their weight. But I didn't react. I had spent months reacting, apologizing, shrinking. Not anymore. Daniel, when he was home, seemed confused by the change. One evening, he found me reading a book in the living room, something I hadn't done in months. "Mom," he said carefully, sitting down across from me, "is everything okay?" I looked up from my book, meeting his eyes. "Why do you ask? You've just been different lately. Mariana says you haven't been helping around the house as much." There it was. Not, "Are you feeling all right?" Not, "What's going on?" Just concern about my usefulness. "I've been helping exactly as much as I want to," I said calmly. "I'm not your maid, Daniel. I'm your mother." His face flushed. "I know that. But you live here and—" "I live here because you invited me," I interrupted. "You asked me to come. You said I would be welcome. You said this would be my home too." "It is your home." "No," I said quietly. "It's your home. And Mariana's home. I'm just someone you allow to stay here as long as I'm useful, as long as I'm quiet, as long as I don't inconvenience anyone." "That's not fair, Mom." "Isn't it?" I closed my book and set it aside. "When was the last time you asked me how I was doing? Really asked, not just said hello in passing? When was the last time you defended me when Mariana spoke to me with disrespect?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no answer because there was no answer. "I love you," I continued, my voice steady despite the pain in my chest. "I will always love you. But I'm starting to realize that love doesn't mean letting people treat you badly, not even your own children." I picked up my book and left him sitting there, his face a mixture of guilt and frustration. I knew he wouldn't think about what I'd said. Not really. He would tell himself I was being dramatic, that I was overreacting, that this was just a phase. Men like Daniel, good men who never meant to hurt anyone, were experts at not seeing what they didn't want to see. That night, I heard them arguing in their bedroom. The walls were thin, and their voices carried even when they tried to keep them low. "Your mother is getting out of control," Mariana hissed. "She talks back now. She doesn't do anything. She just sits around reading like she's on vacation." "She's just going through something," Daniel said, his voice tired. "She'll calm down." "When? How long do I have to put up with this? I didn't sign up to have a live-in mother-in-law who acts like she owns the place." "She's my mother, Mari. What do you want me to do?" "I want you to talk to her, set boundaries. Remind her that this is our home and she needs to respect that." There was a long pause. Then Daniel said quietly, "Okay, I'll talk to her." I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, and felt nothing. No hurt, no anger, just a cold, clear certainty that I couldn't stay here much longer. Not because they would force me to leave, but because I was finally choosing myself. The next morning, I visited Mrs. Hernandez. I knocked on her door at 9 o'clock, half expecting her to have forgotten our conversation, or worse, to regret having offered her kindness to a stranger. But when she opened the door, her face lit up. "Teresa, I was hoping you'd come. Please, come in." Her apartment was small but warm. Everywhere I looked, there were signs of a life well lived. Photographs on the walls, plants on the windowsill, books stacked on tables. It smelled like cinnamon and coffee. Sit," she said, gesturing to a comfortable-looking armchair. "I'll make us tea." While she moved around her tiny kitchen, I looked at the photographs. Mrs. Hernandez as a young woman, beautiful and vibrant. A wedding photo with a handsome man in a military uniform. Children at various ages. Grandchildren, I assumed. "That's my Michael," she said, returning with a tray. She pointed to the man in uniform. "He passed 20 years ago. Heart attack. Quick and painless, the doctor said, but I'm not sure anything about losing someone you love is painless." "I'm sorry," I said softly. "Don't be. We had 43 beautiful years together. That's more than many people get." She handed me a cup of tea, then settled into the chair across from me. "Now tell me, what brought you to my door?" And I told her everything. About the breakfast incident. About standing up to Mariana. about Daniel's conversation and the argument I'd overheard, about feeling like I was finally waking up, but not knowing what to do with this new awareness. She listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, her eyes full of understanding. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what you need to do, don't you? Leave," I whispered. "Not just leave. Reclaim your life. There's a difference." "I'm scared," I admitted. "I'm 55 years old. I don't have a job. I don't have friends here in the city. What if I can't make it on my own?" Mrs. Hernandez leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Teresa, listen to me. You survived losing your husband. You survived giving up your home. You survived months of psychological torture in that apartment. You think you can't survive finding a small place to live and making new friends?" When she put it that way, it did sound manageable, possible even. "I used to have dreams," I said quietly. "Before I got married, before children, before life happened. I wanted to have a little bakery. Nothing fancy, just a small place where I could bake bread and pastries and talk to customers. I love baking. It always made me happy. So why don't you?" I laughed bitterly. "At my age? Starting a business? That's crazy." "Says who?" She raised an eyebrow. "Teresa, I started my current job when I was 72. I work part-time at a bookstore 3 blocks from here. The owner hired me because I know books and I like people. Age had nothing to do with it. But a bakery requires money, a location, permits. And you have savings," she reminded me gently. "You told me about the bank account. That's seed money. That's possibility." I stared at her, my mind racing. Could I really do that? Could I really take that money I'd been saving for emergencies and security, and invest it in a dream I'd given up decades ago? "You don't have to decide everything today," Mrs. Hernandez said, reading my thoughts. "But start taking steps. Start looking at apartments. Start researching what it would take to open a small bakery. Start imagining a life where you're not just surviving, but thriving." I left her apartment 2 hours later with a notebook full of websites to look at, phone numbers to call, and something I hadn't felt in years: excitement. Over the next week, I became a woman on a mission. Every morning, while Daniel and Mariana were at work, I took the bus to different neighborhoods, looking at apartments for rent. I visited bakeries, talked to owners, asked questions. I researched business licenses and health permits. I made spreadsheets of costs and income projections. I felt alive, purposeful, like I had a future again instead of just an endless present of suffering. At the apartment, I continued my quiet resistance. I was polite, but distant. I did my own laundry, cooked my own meals, spent my time in my room or out exploring the city. I was present but not participating, there but not engaged. Mariana's hostility grew sharper, her comments more cutting, but they bounced off me now. I had somewhere else to be, even if I wasn't there yet. I had plans. I had hope. Daniel seemed bewildered by my transformation. He would watch me sometimes with a confused expression, as if trying to figure out what had changed and whether he should be concerned. One evening, he tried again to talk to me. "Mom, we need to discuss your behavior." I looked up from the notebook where I'd been calculating potential bakery expenses. "My behavior? You know what I mean. You've been distant, cold even. Mariana feels like you're being passive-aggressive." "I'm being respectful," I corrected. "I'm giving you and your wife space." "Isn't that what she wanted?" "That's not—" He ran his hand through his hair in frustration. "You're twisting things." "Am I?" I set down my pen and gave him my full attention. "Daniel, answer me honestly. Are you happy with how things have been? With how your wife speaks to me? With how I've been treated in this house? It's been an adjustment for everyone." "That's not an answer." He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. And in that moment, I saw him clearly. Not as my son, not as the boy I'd raised, but as a man who had chosen comfort over courage, who had chosen peace over principle, who loved me perhaps, but not enough to risk his marriage for my dignity. And that was okay, because I was finally choosing myself. "I'm looking for my own place," I said quietly. "I should be out of here within the month." His head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. "What? Mom, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." I smiled, and it was genuine. "For both of us. This isn't working, Daniel. We both know it. and I refuse to spend whatever years I have left being miserable. Where will you go? How will you afford? I have savings, and I have plans. I stood up, gathering my notebook. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. Better than fine. I left him sitting there, stunned, and returned to my room. And for the first time in months, I slept deeply and dreamlessly, like someone who had finally set down a burden they'd been carrying far too long. The apartment I found was in an older part of the city, on the second floor of a building that had character instead of luxury. It wasn't large, just one bedroom, a small kitchen, and a living area with windows that faced east, letting in the morning sun. The landlord was a retired teacher named Mr. Pacheco, a gentleman in his 70s who asked me more about my story than my credit score. I like to know who's living in my building, he explained as we stood in the empty apartment, sunlight streaming across the hardwood floors. I've had too many tenants who were just passing through, treating the place like a hotel. I want people who'll make it a home. I'll make it a home, I promised, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. The rent was reasonable, affordable on my savings while I figured out my next steps. I signed the lease right there, my hand trembling slightly as I wrote my name. Teresa Morrison, not someone's mother, not someone's burden, just Teresa. I would move in 2 weeks. 2 weeks to gather my things, to say goodbye to the life I'd been living, to step into the unknown with nothing but faith that it had to be better than what I was leaving behind. When I told Daniel, his reaction surprised me. Not anger, not relief, but something that looked almost like panic. Mom, wait, let's talk about this. You don't have to leave. We can work things out. We were in the kitchen. Mariana was in the bedroom. She'd stopped even pretending to be civil once she'd learned I was leaving. I think part of her was thrilled to be rid of me, but another part was angry that I'd chosen to go rather than being driven out. She'd wanted to be the victor in this story, and instead, I was simply walking away. There's nothing to work out, I said calmly, packing dishes into a box. I'd bought packing supplies that morning, another small act of reclaiming my independence. I'm 55 years old, Daniel. I'm not dead. I'm not helpless. I can take care of myself. But the money, where did you get the money for an apartment? I looked at him, this man who was my son but also a stranger. From the house your father and I built together. I gave you half for your down payment. I kept half for myself. I just forgot I had it for a while. His face flushed. I didn't know. You thought I was completely dependent on you. That I had nothing. That I had no choice but to accept whatever treatment came my way. I wasn't angry when I said it. Just stating facts. It's not your fault entirely. I let you think that. I let myself think that. But I was wrong. Mom, I'm not angry with you, I continued, sealing the box with packing tape. I'm really not. You're doing what you think is best for your marriage, for your life. I understand that. But I have to do what's best for me now. He was quiet for a long moment, watching me work. Then he said softly, I feel like I'm losing you. You're not losing me. I'm finding myself. There's a difference. Over the next 2 weeks, I packed methodically. I didn't have much. Most of the possessions in that apartment belonged to Daniel and Mariana. But I had my clothes, a few books, the photographs I'd managed to keep, the important things. Mrs. Hernandez helped me. She would come up to the 6th floor with containers of soup or fresh-baked cookies, and we'd sit in my room talking about my plans. She introduced me to the owner of the bookstore where she worked, a woman named Patricia who was looking for part-time help. It's not glamorous, Patricia said when we met. Mostly stocking shelves, helping customers, running the register. But it's steady work, and the hours are flexible. I'll take it, I said immediately. I needed something to do, something to structure my days around while I worked on my bigger dream. Patricia smiled. Don't you want to know the pay first? I trust it's fair. And honestly, I need this more for my sanity than my bank account right now. She hired me on the spot. I also started baking again. Late at night, when Daniel and Mariana were asleep, I would sneak into the kitchen and make bread. Just simple loaves at first. Whole wheat, sourdough, rosemary olive oil. I'd wrap them carefully and take them to Mrs. Hernandez, who would share them with other residents in the building. Word spread. Soon I was getting requests. The woman in 302 wanted dinner rolls for a party. The man in 505 asked if I could make his mother's birthday cake. I said yes to everything, charging just enough to cover ingredients. I wasn't trying to make money yet. I was trying to remember who I used to be before grief and loneliness had buried her. And with each loaf, each cake, each pastry that came out of the oven golden and perfect, I felt pieces of myself coming back. My hands remembered the feel of dough. My nose remembered the smell of yeast and sugar and butter. My heart remembered what it felt like to create something beautiful, to bring joy to others, to have purpose beyond simply existing. The night before I moved out, I couldn't sleep. I lay in that small room one last time, listening to the sounds of the city outside my window, and I felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. I had failed here. There was no other way to look at it. I had come to this apartment with hope and love, believing that family would be enough to sustain me. And I'd been wrong. But maybe failure wasn't the end of the story. Maybe it was just the middle, the dark part before the dawn. I thought about my husband, about what he would say if he could see me now. I thought he'd be proud, not of the suffering I'd endured, but of the strength I'd found to leave. He'd always told me I was braver than I believed, stronger than I knew. Maybe he'd seen this potential in me long before I could see it myself. Early the next morning, Mr. Pacheco arrived with his truck. Daniel had offered to help me move, but I'd declined. This was something I needed to do on my own, with people who'd chosen to help me rather than people who felt obligated. Mrs. Hernandez was there, of course, and Patricia from the bookstore. And surprisingly, several other residents from the building, people I'd barely spoken to, but who'd tasted my bread and somehow understood that this was an important day. We carried boxes down the stairs, loaded furniture into the truck, worked in the kind of comfortable silence that comes from shared purpose. Mariana stayed in the bedroom the entire time, door closed, pretending we didn't exist. And Daniel stood in the doorway of my empty room, watching us load the truck, his face unreadable. As I was about to leave, he stopped me in the hallway. "Mom, I'm sorry." His voice cracked slightly. "For everything. For not seeing. For not protecting you. For choosing wrong." I looked at my son, my beautiful, flawed, human son, and felt my anger finally dissolve into something softer. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. "I know you are," I said gently, "and maybe someday we'll find a way back to each other. But right now, I need to find my way back to myself." I hugged him. He held on longer than I expected, and when we pulled apart, his eyes were wet. "I love you," he said. "I love you too. I always will." And then I walked away, down the stairs, out of the building, into the truck where Mr. Pacheco waited with Mrs. Hernandez in the passenger seat. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked back one last time at the building where I'd spent the worst months of my life, and I felt nothing but relief. The new apartment was everything the old one wasn't. It was smaller, older, less impressive, but it was mine. Every decision, every piece of furniture, every detail belonged to me. I arranged my things slowly, savoring the process. Books on the shelves, photographs on the walls, my favorite blanket draped over the couch. Mrs. Hernandez had given me a plant as a housewarming gift, a small rosemary bush in a terracotta pot. "For your kitchen," she said. "Every home needs something growing in it." I placed it on the windowsill where the morning sun would reach it, and I felt a profound sense of peace. This small green thing, reaching toward the light. That was me now. After months of darkness, I was finally reaching toward the light again. That first night in my own apartment, I made dinner for one. Just a simple meal. Pasta with olive oil and garlic, a salad, a glass of water. But I ate it at my own table, in my own space, on my own schedule, and it was the best meal I'd had in months. I started work at the bookstore the following Monday. Patricia was patient, showing me the computer system, introducing me to regular customers, teaching me the particular organization system they used. The work was easy, almost meditative. I liked the quiet conversations with customers, the peaceful atmosphere, the smell of paper and ink. During my breaks, I would sit in the small employee room and work on my business plan. I'd been researching bakeries, talking to owners, learning about health codes and permits and suppliers. It was overwhelming sometimes, but it was the good kind of overwhelming. the kind that comes from building something rather than watching something collapse. One afternoon, a woman came into the bookstore looking for cookbooks. She was about my age, dressed professionally with kind eyes and laugh lines around her mouth. "I'm opening a restaurant," she explained as I showed her the cookbook section. "Small place, neighborhood spot. I want to feature local suppliers, support other small businesses." "That sounds wonderful," I said sincerely. "Are you interested in cooking?" I hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Actually, I'm planning to open a bakery. Someday. When I'm ready." Her eyes lit up. "Really? What kind of baking?" And I told her about my recipes, my dreams, my plans. She listened with genuine interest, asking questions, making suggestions. When she left, she handed me her business card. "Call me when you're ready to start," she said. "I'll be your first customer. Every restaurant needs a good bread supplier." I looked at the card, Elena Rodriguez, chef and owner, Sabor Casero, and felt hope bloom in my chest like one of the roses from my old garden. Things were happening. Slowly, yes, but they were happening. I was building a life, piece by small piece, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was excited about the future. I was no longer waiting for my life to begin. I was living it, and it was beautiful. 6 months passed, like pages turning in a book I was finally enjoying reading. 6 months of waking up in my own bed, in my own space, with no one to answer to but myself. 6 months of working at the bookstore, saving money, perfecting recipes. 6 months of becoming someone I recognized again. The bookstore became more than just a job. It became a community. Regular customers learned my name, asked about my plans, tasted samples of bread I'd bring in on Fridays. Patricia became not just my employer, but my friend, often staying after closing to help me brainstorm business ideas over tea and whatever pastry I'd baked the night before. "You're ready, you know," she said one evening, biting into a cinnamon roll that had turned out particularly well. "These are incredible. You could open tomorrow and have a line out the door." "I'm not quite there yet," I admitted, though her words warmed me. "I need a few more months of savings. And I still haven't found the right location." But I was close. So close I could taste it, sweet as the frosting on that cinnamon roll. I'd been looking at commercial spaces for weeks. Most were too expensive or in the wrong neighborhoods or required renovations I couldn't afford. But I kept looking, kept hoping, kept believing that the right place would appear when the time was right. And then, one Saturday afternoon, as I was walking back from the market with ingredients for weekend baking, I saw it. A small storefront on a corner I passed every day on my way to work. There was a "for lease" sign in the window that hadn't been there the week before. I stopped, my bags of flour and sugar suddenly heavy in my arms. The space was perfect. Not too large, not too small. Big windows that would let in natural light. A corner location with foot traffic from 2 directions. And most importantly, something about it just felt right, like coming home. I called the number on the sign immediately. The landlord, a man named Mr. Chen, agreed to meet me there within the hour. The inside was bare and dusty, clearly empty for months, but I could see past that. I could see display cases filled with fresh bread. I could see customers sitting at small tables with coffee and pastries. I could see morning light streaming through those windows, golden and warm. I could see my dream taking shape in this forgotten space. "It needs work," Mr. Chen said honestly, running his hand along the wall. "The previous tenant left suddenly. Some plumbing issues. Electrical might need updating. But the bones are good." "How much?" I asked, my heart pounding. He named a figure that was just barely within my budget if I was careful. If I did much of the renovation work myself, if I didn't eat out for a year and kept my own apartment expenses minimal. "I'll take it," I heard myself say. Mr. Chen raised his eyebrows. "Don't you want to think about it? Look at other spaces?" "I've looked at other spaces. This is the one." He smiled, recognizing something in my certainty. "Then let's draw up a lease." That night, I called Mrs. Hernandez with the news. She came up to my apartment with a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a special occasion, and we toasted to new beginnings. "I'm proud of you," she said, her eyes shining. "When I first saw you 6 months ago, you looked like a ghost. Now look at you. You're alive again." "I'm terrified," I admitted. What if I fail? What if the bakery doesn't work? What if I'm making a huge mistake? Then you'll fail, she said simply. And you'll pick yourself up and try something else. Teresa, you've already survived the worst thing that could happen, losing yourself. Everything else is just details. The next 3 months were a blur of activity. I worked at the bookstore during the day and renovated the bakery space at night and on weekends. Mr. Pacheco, my landlord, turned out to be surprisingly handy with electrical work. Patricia helped me paint. Mrs. Hernandez organized a group of volunteers from our building to deep clean everything. Elena, the chef I'd met at the bookstore, kept her promise and placed a standing order for bread once I opened. She also introduced me to other restaurant owners, helping me build a network of wholesale customers before I even had a sign on the door. I learned about business permits and health inspections and liability insurance. I bought used equipment from a restaurant supply store. I tested recipes until my tiny apartment kitchen was constantly covered in flour. I designed a simple menu: artisan breads, classic pastries, a few signature items that had been family recipes. And slowly, impossibly, it came together. I named it Rise. Simple, hopeful, with multiple meanings. Bread rises. The sun rises. People rise from difficult circumstances. It felt right. The day before the opening, I stood in my bakery, and looked around at what I'd built. The walls were painted a warm cream color. The display cases gleamed. The small tables and chairs I'd found at a secondhand store were mismatched but charming. Everything smelled like fresh paint and possibility. I thought about where I'd been a year ago, sleeping in a tiny room in my son's apartment, being yelled at for not waking up early enough to make breakfast, feeling invisible and worthless and trapped. That woman felt like someone from another lifetime. The morning of the opening, I woke up at 4, not because anyone demanded it, but because I chose it, because I had bread to bake and a dream to live and a life to build. The first batch of sourdough went into the oven just as the sun was rising. I watched through the oven window as the loaves expanded and browned, as they became something more than just flour and water and salt. They became transformation itself. Patricia arrived at 6 to help set up. Then Mrs. Hernandez, bringing fresh flowers for the tables. Then Mr. Pacheco, who'd made a wooden sign that said, "Grand Opening," in beautiful calligraphy. Then Elena, who'd brought 3 other restaurant owners to meet me. By the time I unlocked the doors at 7, there was already a line outside. People from the neighborhood who'd seen me working on the space for months and were curious. Customers from the bookstore who'd tasted my samples. Friends of friends who'd heard about the opening. That first day was chaos. Beautiful, exhausting, exhilarating chaos. I sold out of almost everything by noon and had to bake more for the afternoon. People complimented the bread, asked for recipes, took business cards to share with friends. The small tables were constantly full of people drinking coffee and chatting and creating exactly the warm, welcoming atmosphere I'd imagined. At the end of the day, when I finally locked the doors and counted the register, I sat down at one of the tables and cried, not from sadness or stress, but from pure, overwhelming joy. I had done it. I had taken my broken life and built something beautiful from the pieces. 3 weeks after the opening, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the bell above the door chimed and Daniel walked in. I was wiping down the counter, my hair tied back in a scarf, my apron dusted with flour. I froze when I saw him, my heart suddenly pounding. We hadn't spoken since the day I moved out. I'd thought about calling him 100 times but had never quite found the courage. He looked around the bakery, his eyes wide, taking in everything I'd built. The display cases, the menu board, the customers sitting at tables, the warm light, the smell of fresh bread. When his eyes finally met mine, they were filled with something I couldn't quite name. "Mom," he said softly, This is amazing." I set down the cloth I'd been using and came out from behind the counter. "What are you doing here?" Mrs. Hernandez called me. "She said you opened a bakery and I should come see it." He paused, his hands in his pockets, looking suddenly young and uncertain. "She also said I'd been an idiot, and it was time I apologized properly." Despite everything, I smiled. "She said that?" Her exact words were, "Don't be a fool your whole life, Daniel. Your mother is extraordinary and you almost missed it." He took a deep breath. She was right. We sat down at one of the small tables. I brought us coffee and a slice of the lemon olive oil cake I'd made that morning. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I didn't know you could do this," Daniel finally said, gesturing around the bakery. "I mean, I knew you could bake. But this, building a business, creating something from nothing, I never knew you had this in you." "Neither did I admitted. "For a long time, I forgot I was anything more than just someone's wife, someone's mother. But I was always more than that. I just needed to remember." "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for how Mariana treated you, for how I let her treat you, for not standing up for you when I should have, for making you feel like you had to be grateful just to exist in my home." "Our home," I corrected gently. "That's what you promised. You said it would be our home." "I know, and I broke that promise." He looked down at his hands. "After you left, Mariana and I started fighting. About you, at first. But then about everything. About how she treats people. About what's really important. About the kind of people we want to be." I waited, letting him find his words. "We're separated," he said quietly. "She moved out 2 months ago. We're probably getting divorced." I should have felt vindicated, satisfied even. But all I felt was sadness for him, for the pain he was going through. "I'm sorry, Daniel. Don't be. It was the right thing. I just wish I'd seen it sooner, before I hurt you so badly." I reached across the table and took his hand. "You didn't lose me. I'm right here. But I almost did, and I would have deserved it." "Maybe," I agreed. "But you're here now. That counts for something." We talked for 2 hours. About everything and nothing. About his marriage, my bakery, the year we'd lost, the relationship we wanted to rebuild. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a magical fix. But it was honest. And that was enough for now. When he left, he hugged me tight. "Can I come back?" he asked. "Not to fix things or because I feel guilty, but because I want to. Because I want to know you. The real you. Not just my mother." "I'd like that," I said. And as I watched him walk away down the street, I realized something profound. I had forgiven him, not because he deserved it, or because I had to, but because holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting someone else to suffer. I'd spent too much of my life bitter and hurt. I was choosing something different now. I was choosing peace. That night, I walked home to my small apartment as the sun was setting, painting the city in shades of gold and amber. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, and the woman I was now. They barely seemed like the same person. The old Teresa had been waiting for permission to exist, for someone else to give her value, for life to happen to her. The new Teresa created her own permission, found her own value, made life happen, and tomorrow I would wake up at 4 in the morning again, not because anyone demanded it, but because I had bread to bake and dreams to chase and a life worth living. Rise. That's what I had done. That's what I would keep doing, every single day, for the rest of my life. 1 year after opening Rise, I stood in my bakery on a Sunday morning watching the early light stream through the windows, turning everything golden. The display cases were filled with the morning's baking, crusty sourdough loaves, buttery croissants, cinnamon rolls still warm from the oven. The air smelled like home, like happiness, like all the dreams I'd thought I'd buried coming back to life. Daniel had become a regular visitor. Not every day, not even every week, but consistently. He would come in on Saturday mornings, sit at the corner table, and we would talk over coffee and whatever new recipe I was testing. We were rebuilding our relationship slowly, carefully, like constructing something delicate and important that couldn't be rushed. He told me about his divorce, which had been finalized 3 months earlier. About therapy he was attending to understand why he'd let things get so bad. About the lessons he was learning, even though they came painfully. "I thought keeping the peace was the same as being a good husband," he'd told me one morning. "I thought if I just didn't rock the boat, everything would be fine. But I was wrong. Keeping peace at the expense of what's right isn't peace at all. It's cowardice." I'd squeezed his hand across the table. "You're learning. That's what matters." Mrs. Hernandez had become like a second mother to me, or perhaps a sister. Age makes those distinctions less important. We had tea together every Tuesday evening, alternating between her apartment and mine. She'd watch the bakery sometimes when I needed to run errands, and I'd bake her favorite almond cookies every week without fail. "You know what I love most about your story?" she said one evening as we sat in my apartment. "You didn't wait to be rescued. You rescued yourself." "I had help," I reminded her. "I had you. I just pointed you toward the door, dear. You're the one who walked through it." The bakery had become more than just a business. It had become a gathering place, a community hub. There was old Mr. Washington, who came in every morning at 7 for black coffee and a plain roll, always sitting at the same table by the window. Maria, a young single mother, who would bring her daughter in after school for hot chocolate and cookies. The book club that met every Thursday evening, buying pastries and filling the space with laughter and passionate debates about literature. Elena's restaurant, Saber Casero, had become one of my biggest wholesale accounts. She featured my bread on her menu, and her customers often came to the bakery specifically because they'd tasted it at her restaurant. We'd developed a friendship built on mutual respect and shared understanding of what it meant to build something from nothing. But the most surprising relationship that developed was with Patricia from the bookstore. She'd been so supportive during my transition that when she mentioned she was thinking about retiring and selling the bookstore, I'd immediately asked if she'd consider a partnership instead. "What do you mean?" she'd asked, confused. "I mean, what if we combined them? The bookstore and the bakery? People could browse books while having coffee and pastries. We could host readings, book clubs, community events. It would be bigger than either business alone." Her eyes had lit up with possibility. "Like a literary cafe?" "Exactly like that." We'd spent 6 months planning, renovating, negotiating with Mr. Chen for the space next door, and 3 months ago, we'd opened the expanded space. Rise and read, half bakery, half bookstore, completely magical. The response had been overwhelming. People loved having a place where they could spend hours browsing books, sipping coffee, tasting fresh pastries, meeting friends, discovering new authors. We'd created something special, something that fed more than just hunger. On this particular Sunday morning, we were hosting a special event, a community breakfast for neighborhood women over 50. It had been Mrs. Hernandez's idea. "There are so many women like you were," she'd said, "invisible, forgotten, convinced their best years are behind them. Let's show them that's not true." 23 women showed up. Some came alone, hesitant and uncertain. Others came in pairs, friends supporting friends. They ranged from women in their early 50s to one incredible woman named Dorothy, who proudly announced she was 87. I'd prepared a feast: fresh bread, pastries, fruit, cheese, eggs, coffee, tea. Everything laid out buffet style so people could choose what they wanted, as much as they wanted. No one counting their portions or making them feel guilty for eating. As we ate, women began to share their stories. Sandra, 59, whose husband had left her for a younger woman after 35 years of marriage. Rebecca, 62, who'd been laid off from her job and couldn't find another one because of her age. Patricia, 56, whose adult children rarely called and never visited. Jennifer, 68, who'd spent 40 years caring for others and had no idea who she was anymore. Story after story of women who'd been made to feel worthless, invisible, past their expiration date. Women who'd given everything and been told it wasn't enough. Women who'd forgotten they were still here, still capable, still full of dreams and potential and value. I listened to each one, my heart aching with recognition. I had been every one of these women. I understood their pain intimately. When they'd all spoken, Mrs. Hernandez looked at me and nodded. It was my turn. I stood up, my hands trembling slightly, and told them my story. Not the sanitized version, not the version that made me look strong from the beginning, but the real one, the voice message, the empty house, the sleeping in my car, the months of humiliation, the morning I was yelled at for being sick, the moment I almost gave up. And then I told them about the bank account I'd forgotten, about Mrs. Hernandez on the bench, about the first morning I refused to make breakfast, about signing the lease on my apartment, about this bakery, about choosing myself. "I was 55 when I started over," I said, looking around the room at faces that reflected my own journey back at me. 55 and convinced I was too old, too tired, too broken. But I was wrong. We're never too old to start again. We're never too broken to heal, and we're never, ever worthless. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, mine included. I'm not special, I continued. I'm not extraordinary. I'm just a woman who got tired of being treated badly and decided to do something about it. And if I can do it, so can every single one of you. Dorothy, the 87-year-old, raised her hand. What if we don't have savings like you did? What if we really do have nothing? Then you start with what you do have, I said. Even if that's just the decision to value yourself. Even if that's just one small act of self-respect. Even if that's just saying no for the first time in your life. You start somewhere, and then you take the next step, and then the next one. And before you know it, you've walked yourself into a new life. After the breakfast, several women stayed to talk individually. Sandra asked about starting her own small business. Rebecca wanted to know about the bookstore job opportunities. Jennifer just wanted to sit and cry and be held, and I held her, understanding that sometimes that's the first step, allowing yourself to feel the pain you've been swallowing for years. As I was cleaning up, a woman I hadn't noticed during the breakfast approached me. She was probably in her mid-60s, elegantly dressed, with silver hair and intelligent eyes. "Teresa Morrison?" she asked. "Yes? My name is Helen Wu. I'm a reporter for the City magazine. I heard about this event through a friend, and I'd love to do a feature story about you and the bakery, about second chances and women reclaiming their lives." I hesitated. I'd never wanted fame or attention. I'd just wanted to live my life, to be happy, to make bread. "It's not about glory," Helen said, reading my hesitation. "It's about visibility. There are thousands of women in this city who need to hear your story, who need to know it's possible, that they're not alone." I thought about the woman I'd been 18 months ago, sitting in my car behind a laundromat, convinced my life was over. How desperately I'd needed to hear a story like mine. How much it would have meant to know that someone had walked this path before me and survived. "Okay," I said. "Let's do it." The article came out 6 weeks later. Helen had written beautifully, capturing not just my story, but the broader truth about women who become invisible as they age, who are discarded by people they've devoted their lives to, who find the courage to start over. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of emails, phone calls, messages through social media. Women thanking me for speaking their truth. Women asking for advice. Women sharing their own stories of survival and transformation. Rise and Read became even busier. People came specifically because they'd read the article, wanted to support what we were doing, wanted to be part of a community that valued women of all ages. I hired 2 more employees, both women over 50, who'd been struggling to find work. And then one Tuesday afternoon, 3 months after the article was published, Mariana walked in. I was behind the counter, helping a customer, when I saw her. She looked different, smaller somehow, less polished. Her hair was pulled back simply, her clothes less expensive than I remembered. She stood near the door, looking around uncertainly, as if she wasn't sure she should be there. I finished with my customer, took a deep breath, and walked over to her. "Mariana," I said neutrally. "Teresa." She looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Shame. I read the article. I didn't know the reporter was writing about you until I saw your name, and then I read it, and I realized what I'd done, what I'd been. I waited, saying nothing. "I was cruel to you," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Unforgivably cruel. I treated you like you were nothing, and I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I see it now. I see what I did." "What changed?" I asked. "My mother got sick. Cancer. I had to take care of her, and suddenly I was the burden in someone else's home. My sister made me feel exactly how I made you feel, and I understood." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I understood what I'd done to you, and I was horrified. I looked at this young woman, because she still was young, barely 35, and I felt something unexpected. Compassion. Not because she deserved it, but because I'd learned that holding on to anger only poisoned the person carrying it. "I forgive you," I said quietly. She looked up, shocked. "Just like that?" "Not just like that. It took me a long time to get here. But yes, I forgive you. Not for your sake, but for mine. because I refused to carry that weight anymore. Is your mother okay? I asked. She's in remission, and we're working on our relationship. She was never kind to me either growing up. I think I learned cruelty from her, and then I passed it on to you. But I'm trying to break that cycle. That's good, I said, and meant it. That takes courage. She looked around the bakery, at the books, at the people, at everything I'd built. This is beautiful. You're incredible. I'm sorry I never saw it. I didn't see it either for a long time, I admitted. But I see it now. That's what matters. After she left, I sat down at one of the tables, overwhelmed by the strangeness of it all. A year and a half ago, this woman had made my life unbearable. And now she'd apologized, and I'd forgiven her. And somehow that felt like the final piece of my healing falling into place. That evening, I closed up the bakery and walked home through the city streets as the sun set. I thought about how far I'd come, about the woman who'd arrived at her son's apartment with 3 suitcases and a heart full of hope, about the woman who'd slept in her car and eaten 1 egg for dinner, about the woman who'd finally stood up and said, "Enough." All of her was still inside me, the grief, the pain, the humiliation, but she was joined now by someone stronger, someone who'd learned that you don't need anyone's permission to value yourself, that you're never too old to start over, that the only person who can save you is you. I'm 56 now. I wake up every morning at 4, not because I have to, but because I choose to, because I have bread to bake and a business to run and a life to live, a life I built myself, from the ruins of what I thought my life would be. Daniel and I have dinner together once a week. Our relationship isn't what it was, but it's real now. Honest. Built on mutual respect rather than obligation. I'm dating someone, a widower named Robert who comes into the bakery every Saturday for coffee and conversation. It's slow and sweet and uncertain, and I'm not sure where it's going, but I'm enjoying the journey. Mrs. Hernandez and I are planning to travel together next year. Paris, maybe. Or Portugal. Somewhere we can eat good food and see beautiful things and remind ourselves that life isn't over just because we're past 50. But more than any of that, I've learned the most important lesson of all. I am enough, just as I am. Not because I have a successful business or a reconciled relationship with my son or new friends or a potential romance, but because I exist. Because I chose to value myself. Because I decided I mattered. And if you're listening to this story, if you're a woman who's been made to feel invisible or worthless or past your prime, please hear me. You matter too. Your life isn't over. Your story isn't finished. You have time. You have value. You have everything you need to start again because you have yourself. And that's always been enough. It was always enough. You just had to remember. Rise. That's what we do. Again and again and again, for as long as we're breathing. We rise,